There's not much that annoys me more than people saying that's just how the world is. I find it extremely cowardly and close-minded to assume that things are the way they are because they have to be, to not think any deeper about it, and to stop yourself from considering alternatives and how they might be better. The world is the way it is only as long as no one does anything about it. Thousands of years of human civilization have proven that. Mankind will never conquer space, that's just the way it is. Fuck you. But what can you do to change the world? Serious question. What can you, an individual average person, do to make a meaningful impact in regards to any of the most important talking points of the day? Will voting really make a difference in this world ruled by people who seem so set on letting everything burn away because they won't live through the consequences of their policies, who lend more importance to their billions of dollars in profits than the well-being of humanity, or applaud when people's rights are taken away without a moment's notice and without the support of the vast majority of the public? Is this just the way the world is? No. There are things that could be done to make our situation better, but those people with the power, they're stuck in their ways, and voting won't change their minds. Even if they did listen to you, do you really think your words could convince them to change course? Do you think your voice is louder than the money they get from their corporate donors? They're just gonna let us all be trampled on. Does it make you angry? At least a little bit? It should. The systems that enforce our current path feel almost incomprehensibly large and powerful, especially when compared to the average person. It almost seems impossible to do anything to affect any change against it. But we still have to make the most of what we have, because whether we like it or not, we live in this world, and we have to do whatever we can to be happy while we exist. The world isn't perfect, but its existence is what allows us to try to achieve some sort of fulfillment, right? So, why would anyone want to watch it burn? Why would someone want to violently tear it all down? Why would someone want to destroy the world? In the later seasons of Attack on Titan, spoilers ahead, we are introduced to the idea of the Rumbling, an event in which the millions of colossal titans lying dormant inside Paradis Island's walls are released to trample over the entire rest of the globe, killing probably everyone else as retaliation against any attack on the people of the island. And we learn that our main character, Eren, possesses the power to activate it. Since the possibility of this global mega-genocide was introduced, Attack on Titan has been, at least in large part, a story about whether or not such a power should be used, and audiences have been split in debates over which side they support. The Alliance, those who don't want the Rumbling, and the Jaegerists, who think it is the right course of action, which begs the question, why would anyone ever want to do such a thing? Global annihilation is a pretty radical response to getting attacked, but this dilemma is the result of lots of individual pieces which have been carefully put together since the very first episode of the series, and ends up being about more than just the simple question of if genocide is right or wrong. Free will isn't real. Well, that's not really what it's about. More so that, on a broad scale, people's actions are largely influenced or even determined by preceding events and existing forces and systems which they have no control. When we meet our main character, Eren, he appears to be a simple child with a dream of a better world, one without the Titans trapping humanity inside their walls. The Titans are simply a problem that humanity faces. We don't know why they're here. They might as well be a force of nature, and so getting rid of them is a very obvious good thing to do. There is no moral complexity here. It is good for Titans to not exist. Later, after Eren joins the Survey Corps and fights some battles with them, we learn that there are humans who are also Titans, and they are seemingly trying to help the Titans destroy humanity. So, helping humanity requires fighting other humans, but remember, it is still good for Titans to not exist. Having to fight a few humans does not change that fact. The same holds true when we find out that the government has long been conspiring to have nothing done about the Titans. Also factoring in how they've always been far removed from the struggles and fears of those living closest to the Titans and their apparent apathy to their citizens' well-being, it becomes obvious that they should be overthrown, even if the current state of things is supposedly a part of a promise of peace. While Eren is having a little mental breakdown over something, the rest of the gang is pretty set on a refusal to believe that they have to choose between peace and freedom. It is still good for Titans to not exist. This has not changed, and so the characters choose to walk an uncertain path where they achieve their freedom from the Titans and deal with whatever struggles come next. The false dichotomy is rejected. It's basically just Gurren Lagann up to this point. But then, by the time Eren and his buddies finally reach the ocean, we have learned that the Titans are not the highest evil in the world, and certainly not the only obstacle to freedom. The Titans were merely an arm of the system of racial oppression carried out by the military dictatorship empire Marley, which seeks to eventually wipe out everyone on the island. This racial hatred is not just found in the government of Marley, but the country's general populace as well, and not just in Marley, but seemingly also the entire rest of the world as a result of a millennia-long cycle of violence. The people of Paradis are part of an ethnicity known as Eldians, which have the power to transform or be transformed into Titans, and thus are feared and treated horribly around the globe. The rest of the world's hatred towards the people of Paradis and their fear that the Eldians will lash out against them is accelerated by the Eldians' newly won freedom from the Titans, a condition which they see as enough of a threat to justify a preemptive attack. This sets up a conflict that shouldn't have to exist. Peace should not have to necessitate the continued oppression of the Eldians. It is good for Titans to not exist, and Paradis can simply live in peace. Marley and the rest of the world should not be against the people of Paradis making life better for themselves. This development parallels what a lot of people experience as they grow up, realizing that many struggles you know of or deal with yourself are not simply part of the natural state of the world, but the result of human systems and the centuries of history which developed them. The characters of Attack on Titan quite literally have the true complexity and cruelty of the world opened up to them as they grow up and gain knowledge that conflicts with their black and white worldview, which understandably made complete sense to them at the time. The Titans really shouldn't have to exist, but without them, Paradis is now perceived as a greater threat to the outside world, and so now that we understand what the world is truly like, we should find a way to continue in this state of greater well-being, free from the Titans without all dying. The struggle is now not just for increased freedom, but for survival against the rest of the world, and the solutions are no longer simple and obvious. Aaron's first question is, if we kill everyone on the other side of the ocean, will we finally be free then? And whoa there, hold your horses, buddy. This situation is bad, but maybe we shouldn't jump to super global mega genocide so quickly. We can't kill people just cause they're racist. While the Marleyan government is directly responsible for the oppression, terrorizing, and slaughter of Eldians, the vast majority of the population played at most a minuscule part in that. Like, what the fuck did this baby do? Plus, these people are subject to an insane level of indoctrination, not just from the government, but from the cultural understanding of Eldians as disgusting and dangerous, each with a terrible monster inside of them, just waiting to be released. Anyone raised in such an environment who didn't become racist would be an anomaly, and possibly Jesus Christ himself. Not everyone can be Falco, you are not immune to propaganda and whatnot. So let's consider what other options we might have first. The best possible outcome would be for everyone to magically get along and never fight again, but we should probably think of something more pragmatic. Like, instead of killing everyone, we just fight a normal war in order to defend ourselves. Don't instigate violence, but just push back the inevitable attack and then try to work out a truce and build diplomatic relations out of that. Maybe Paradis could have even tried working with the Mideast forces which Marley was fighting, instead of doing literally nothing to boost their position in the world other than talk to Japanese people during the 4-year time skip. Yeah, a little bit of standard military action. Except the problem with that is cycles of violence, or I'm going to kill you because you killed my dad because he killed your uncle, because Attack on Titan gives us a nice little case study on revenge and its ability to rope more and more people into a chain of violence. We can start with Gabby, this nice little indoctrinated genocidal child soldier. After seeing her home destroyed by enemy soldiers, she chases after them in order to carry out revenge. She takes her anger out on my wife, Sasha, and kills her. All of Sasha's friends respond by beating the shit out of the 12-year-old girl and her friend here, who was just kind of along for the ride. All of them except John and Connie, who actually tried to tend to Sasha before she dies. Later, Gabby meets a few more people who knew Sasha, who also try to kill her once they find out what she did. Looking back on everything here, we can spell out a very clear chain of events. A broader, already existing conflict victimizes an individual who seeks out revenge on their perceived attackers, which then victimizes more people on the other side who subsequently join the chain of revenge. Gabby's never killed in any of these situations, but it's easy to see how if she was, some people who were close to her would probably seek out revenge in the same way as the people who were close to Sasha. What makes this more complicated though is that the starting point I chose here was arbitrary, and paints Gabby purely as a victim and the attacking forces as purely antagonistic. I could have just as easily started with the death of Eren's mother, which in some way led to him eventually beginning the attack on Gabby's hometown, as the ones responsible for the Titan rampage were from Marley. Suddenly, Liberio's attackers can be framed as the victims, while Gabby is a little bit of collateral damage, and and fighting for the wrong side. But unfortunately, this shit goes way deeper. Many more battles, multiple wars, even more ethnic cleansing, and thousands of years take us to a point where we aren't even sure which version of history is true. Are the Eldians responsible for starting everything because they took over the world, or is everyone else responsible because they overthrew the prospering, peaceful Eldian Empire? Both sides justify their own righteousness with their own narratives of history, and they frame things however they need to in order to back up what they already believe is the right course of action. And that course of action is usually more revenge, which just leads to more suffering. The only way to get out of this cycle is to recognize that whoever is at fault for the beginning of the cycle is irrelevant at this point. There is no reason to try and argue over who is more righteous because they are the true victims. What matters is that due to the ongoing conflict, people on both sides become victims in some way, which often leads to them lashing out. No one's pain here is invalid. The only true righteous path is one that creates peace and makes the world better, because we do not live in the past. We live in the present, and we have to make the most of what we have now. Gabby's chain on the cycle of violence is broken by my father-in-law, Sasha's dad, who, when given the knife to execute the girl who killed his daughter, refuses to do so, recognizing that this is not an action that will make anything better. Actions like this from other people close to Sasha allow Gabby to finally start seeing the humanity in this group of people she had never met before, yet was taught to hate, and she begins to question her own actions and the actions of Marley. The war continues around her, and she is forced to kill more people, but it is done out of a pragmatic drive to achieve what she thinks is the right course of action, not out of hatred. However, the problem is that wars are bigger than the choices of single individuals. While Gabby and the people in her chain chose to break the cycle of violence, this conflict is made of many more chains, and it is not normal for people to break out. Many of those in power on Paradis are willing to escape the cycle, but those in Marley actively push for invasion. If one side is willing to stop, but the other isn't, violence continues. Because of the nature of cycles of violence, it is very possible that standard military action against the rest of the world, even if it is successful in defending the island, will only continue to fuel the cycle and lead to more hatred towards the Eldians, thus extending the conflict over many more generations of suffering, death, and destruction for both sides. Of course, wars don't always have to lead to an endless cycle of expanding violence. To say that it is impossible for two groups of people to become friendly or even just stop fighting at all after centuries of rivalry is one of the most blatantly stupid points I've seen people use when talking about Attack on Titan, and you can really only think that if you know nothing about history. Here's some examples, I guess. But to achieve such an alleviation of tensions requires an open dialogue between the two nations, allowing for negotiation and hopefully the creation of systems which make war less beneficial to both parties. The problem with that is self-fulfilling prophecies, or they're gonna attack us because they think we're gonna attack them first, so we have to attack them before they attack us before we attack. The situation between Marley and Paradis is especially complicated by their views of each other. The Marleyans feel like they need to attack Paradis in large part because they fear an attack from Paradis. They are kind of right to be afraid of this, as certain people with significant power are planning to attack Marley. But these Paradisians' main reason for wanting to attack is because they fear that Marley is going to attack them first, because they think that Paradis is going to attack them first. In this way, both sides have the same mindset towards the other, two mindsets of fear, which feed off of each other and push both sides towards conflict. This problem can be alleviated through diplomacy. That's how we do it in real life. Having an open dialogue between two groups of people allows not just negotiation, but an opportunity for mutual understanding of what each side wants and what each side is doing. Severing or blocking off diplomacy is what leads to a spiral of mutual fear, but fear can also lead people to refuse open dialogue. Eren goes with the scouts to visit Marley in an attempt to establish some sort of diplomatic connection, but they fail to establish diplomatic relations once they realize how extensive the rest of the world's hatred towards them really is. While, at least to me, it doesn't really feel like they did everything they could, they at least tried to reach out to Marley, whereas Marley made no attempt at using diplomacy. Again, it is Marley which dispels hope for peace. They had the potential to give Paradis hope that they could break out of these larger forces, but it seems like their pre-existing hatred was simply too strong. Their view of the Eldians as bloodthirsty monsters then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, as they seek no diplomatic relations and prepare an attack on Paradis, leading Paradis to make no progress towards peace and eventually attack Marley preemptively. This attack then further pushes the narrative that the Paradis Eldians don't want peace and, well, you know, you know how it is. A select few Paradisians, those who will eventually create the Alliance, hold on to the belief that the world doesn't have to be this way, that they can secure their survival and freedom while also eventually creating a lasting peace. But how realistic is that really? Everyone is being pushed by these massive, invisible, self-perpetuating forces, culture, indoctrination, self-fulfilling prophecies, and the cycle of violence. To achieve a good ending requires breaking a huge number of people free from said forces which are hard for even single individuals to break themselves out of. And there is no indication from anyone with power in Marley that they will choose the path of peace. It's a situation that creates despair, leading people to conclude that nothing can be done to change people's ways, that the wheel of revenge can't be stopped, that this is simply the way the world is. Two ideologies spawn from this despair. Zeke, tired of the seemingly endless suffering, proposes to give up on life, sterilize the Eldian race, and then get the rest of the world to let them slowly die off in peace. Eren and his supporters, meanwhile, find this unacceptable. While they also have no hope for a peaceful option, to lie down and die is something they refuse to do, especially when there is a solution that will truly secure the safety of Paradis by destroying the cycle of violence entirely. After all, we know that there are millions of colossal titans lying dormant within the walls, waiting for a person with the right power and conviction to release them in case of an enemy attack. And the Marleyans are already here, ready to kill us all. What else can we do? At this point, I would like to state clearly that I do not intend on arguing for or against the morality or necessity of the rumbling. That is not the point of this video. While debating the morality of specific actions is fun, I feel like much of the discourse has been caught up in those overly specific scenarios rather than on what the show is broadly trying to portray, myself included. I don't think the leaders of Paradis did everything they really could have to achieve a diplomatic solution. However, the Marleyans and the rest of the anti-Eldian world did literally nothing to indicate a desire for anything less than to commit genocide, and I think that fact and the way different Paradisians react to it are what's most important to focus on. There was no attempt for Marley to listen to the perspective of Paradis or sympathize with their struggles. Their actions produced no hope for a good ending, and the rest of the world's hatred and fear ran so deep that despite knowing about the retaliatory threat of the rumbling, they decided they were going to attack anyways. These actions then result in the most extreme reaction. A good or at least better ending may have still been possible, but the base of what Attack on Titan portrays with the rumbling is the effect that a lack of hope for change has on an oppressed group, that when facing a world showing them only hatred or apathy, refusing to even listen to their side of the story, and presenting no path towards a peaceful solution, a significant portion of the oppressed will turn to violent and extreme action. Some will hold on to hope that a better solution can be achieved, but with no reason for that hope coming from the outside, many will turn away from pursuing what seems to be impossible. A people not embraced by the world will burn it down to feel its warmth. Attack on Titan's audience has been debating for years now over which side of its final conflict is in the right, with most people ending up as either supporters of the rumbling or the Alliance. This debate will most definitely not end anytime soon, and that's due to the complexity of the world, characters, and story that Isayama created, and maybe some writing hiccups, allowing for an extremely complex, healthy, civil discussion. This debate does not just apply to a fictional universe, though. As a supporter of the Alliance, I recognize how my personal values influence the way I see the conflict in Attack on Titan, as well as the real-world implications of my stances on the story's issues. I wish for a world in which as many people as possible are able to live as free as possible, and so I want to see an end to things like oppression and violent conflict which take freedom away from people. This leads me to support stuff like international cooperation and mutual understanding between rival groups and different countries. Some might say that achieving a good peace is impossible in some cases, but Gurren Lagann is my favorite anime, so it's hard for me to believe that anything is impossible. In difficult situations, I tend to seek out alternative solutions, and I always hold on to the hope that things can work out. Finally, I tend to view people's actions as products of things they are not individually responsible for, most of the time the environment they grew up in. And so I usually don't hate people for anything they've done, which I've learned is not really normal. Vengeance and retribution, while they are sexy ideas no doubt, have never really felt important to me since graduating 5th grade. Plus, I can't resist loving a good good redemption arc. These ideas, a desire for peace and freedom, a drive to find and achieve the best possible solution, and my personal values on understanding others, forgiveness, and redemption, they are the core of why I think I don't support the rumbling. And I of course think it's important to understand the other side of this debate. For that reason, I have laid out what I see as the strongest foundation for their argument. Aaron's goal is not necessarily destroying the world, but the current state of it, the ongoing threat to his people, the systems of oppression, and ultimately the cycle of violence, self-fulfilling prophecies, and lack of understanding which drive this conflict. The apocalypse here is representative of an oppressed group violently getting rid of what they believe is making their lives worse after seeing no other pragmatic path forward. But also, I think it's important to recognize that no one is completely logical. While we can all lay out the pragmatic reasons for whatever position we're trying to push, there are also base emotions and unique life experiences which push us towards feeling certain ways about these positions. My life has not been one of living under oppression or in poverty, struggling against the system, and so I am less inclined to desire such radical action and have much more hope for things to change for the better. I am not someone like Aaron. When we meet our main character Aaron, he appears to mostly be a simple child with a dream of a better world, one without the Titans, and he wants this simply to give himself and humanity more freedom. His inner desires change significantly though the day his home is attacked by the warriors of Marley and he watches his mom be devoured as he is unable to do anything. This moment marks the split between Aaron's desire for freedom and his desire for revenge. He continues to do whatever is pragmatically necessary to achieve freedom from the Titans, but now he also has this constantly simmering hatred for whatever or whoever stands in the way of that goal, and a desire to not just defeat them, but to punish them and make them hurt like he did. We learn that even as a child, he could easily dehumanize and kill people who he found morally reprehensible with no remorse. It follows then that the same can be done to the people he learns were responsible for everything, those fucking traitors. And then he learns the true state of the world, the millennia of war and genocide, the ongoing brutal dehumanization and oppression of Eldians around the world, and the current plans to wipe out Paradis once and for all. All of this, as well as the world's clear disinterest in pursuing peace, compound on Aaron's already immense hatred for those in the way of freedom. By the time he chooses to start the rumbling, he hates not just those who directly wronged him, but the entire state of the world, which he understands has driven those people to do those horrible things. He hates the cycle of violence, but his rage still being directed towards other people leads him to end the cycle by turning it one last time. And it is for this reason that when Aaron arrives with the Colossal Titans on Marleyan's shore, he is not unemotionally looking over the destruction, thinking that this is simply necessary to achieve peace. No, he's being driven by his hatred. He recalls his most painful memory, and he thinks to himself the same thing he had been saying since that day: I'll kill them all. Every last one of them. It turns out that it's really a slim margin of people who want to destroy things just for the sake of watching the world burn. Through Attack on Titan, we can see that one might arrive at such a conclusion due to a combination of pragmatic drives to survive and improve their standard of living, and emotion, anger, and hatred towards whatever is holding them down. A combination of suffering and hopelessness caused by a lack of understanding from those with the power leads to hatred simmering in the oppressed and eventually extreme violence. Just like how the story acknowledges that the oppressors are effectively pushed into the choices they make by the forces of history, revenge, cycle, and the systems that they live in, Aaron's choices leading all the way through starting the rumbling are also framed almost as inevitable consequences of the same stuff. Causality determines that when oppressive hatred dominates, the victims of it will tear it down by whatever means they deem necessary. The people who want to destroy the world are not just those that are chaotically evil, but more often people with genuine good desires for themselves and the people around them, who have gone long ignored and been backed into a corner, leading them to believe not just that the only way out is something extreme, but that the extreme action is good because it will hurt the people who have wronged them. And while I would personally argue against such desires, I think to invalidate them altogether is to invalidate the pain of those with legitimate grievances against the world. We live in a period of unprecedented social and political instability in which the most radical groups have become more popular while pushing for increasingly extreme methods of change. This has coincided with a rise in a kind of political doomerism, a lack of trust in our institutions to make meaningful progress towards the most important issues, leading people to either give up on hope for political change or give them the conviction to make that change by whatever means necessary. As an early 2000s American Zoomer, my experience of the political landscape has felt like an endless cycle of shootings in schools and by cops on civilians, followed by protests and rioting, followed by a lack of any significant advancement in policy past the local level in some areas. I grew up listening to news reports of unpopular wars that started before I was born. In school, I learned about the ever closer threat of global warming, a lesson that always ended with the fact that we hadn't done enough to even slow its effects. A constant thread of popular proposals to change the system being turned down or ignored leads us to today, where the majority of us live paycheck to paycheck, unable to afford a single medical emergency. Preventable gun violence is a daily occurrence, and the Supreme Court can take away the rights of half the population basically on a whim without any input from the public. When observing the political sphere, growing up for our generation has felt like a constant outcry for the most basic changes, almost always followed by a complete lack of empathy from many of those with the power to make those changes. It's easy to conclude that they just don't care. If anything, to those who are most marginalized, the most obvious conclusion might not be that those in charge are apathetic, but that they actively hate you, want you to suffer, and wish for your destruction. The decision to remove the Titans from Paradis was effectively a conclusion that a people's freedom from oppression did not have to be sacrificed to maintain the peace of the world, that humanity was not so bloodthirsty that they would fight to the death over the right of a group of fellow humans to exist in a state of greater well-being. At the time, the characters didn't really know this was the conflict that would result from simply improving their standard of living, but once they find out the truth of the outside world, they stick to that conclusion, to find a peace that doesn't involve sacrificing themselves. However, it ends up mostly being the fear and hatred of the outside world towards the Eldians which dispels hope for such an ending, and thus to a significant portion of those on Paradis, drastic action becomes imperative. What should have been a simple liberation became an us-or-them situation in which wielding the most power became the only thing that mattered, in which well-being was determined by the spilt blood of the other, in which hatred would drive action. And the majority of the fault for that lies with the people who did nothing to pursue peace, no matter what invisible forces determined that they would make those choices. It is good for Titans to not exist, so if the world stands in the way of our freedom from them, we'll just tear it down. Again, I don't want to say that it's right for this to happen, but it's true that Marley sowed the seeds for their own destruction, and I think a lot of people view ongoing political trends similarly. It's a perfect time for people to resonate with Attack on Titan's themes about what apathy, hatred, and a refusal to empathize does to an oppressed group. You either destroy them, or your hatred is reflected back at you tenfold. Stories like this are becoming more and more common and popular. Stories about people feeling marginalized, receiving little to no support, and often being outright hated, and eventually resorting to violence because they feel like there is no other way out. These stories parallel the existing populist desire to destroy the world. Not a mindless destruction of everything that exists, but a tearing down of the systems that make up the current severely flawed state of our society, achieved through whatever means necessary. We do not want to live in a society where this is so common. The measures necessary to make the world better should not have to be achieved through violence. We live in a society meant to answer to the will of the people and the peaceful deliberation of those we elect. But to a lot of us, it really feels like a lot of our supposed representatives would rather focus on their corporate donors, religious dogmatism, and culture war nonsense over the well-being of their constituents. This refusal to make meaningful progress towards real issues is what creates the lack of hope for change and eventually makes people conclude that violence is necessary. The needs of the people must be answered before a significant portion of them turn their backs on civil society and resort to the politics of blood and power. The problem is, just like what we see in Attack on Titan, the people holding back social progress don't do so simply because they want to. Their choices are the results of massive, invisible, self-perpetuating forces and systems. As we grow up, it only becomes more clear how many of the problems in our world, even the few with fairly obvious solutions, are heavily ingrained in our societies due to our history and the complex structures of our institutions, which can be changed, but not easily. Attack on Titan's apocalyptic conclusion was only possible because the situation made the people of Paradis ask themselves, is our world so fundamentally broken that the only way to make any meaningful progress is to destroy everything? This is a serious question that many people are asking about real political systems. When important issues seem to go unaddressed, people lose trust in the systems that currently govern us. They get angry at the people in charge, and they lash out at their perceived enemies. Again, this is not meant to be a moral statement. more like a prediction, a portrayal of a trend that tends to happen in reality. If a situation seems dire enough, if it seems like the only way to save the ones you love is to tear everything else down, Attack on Titan shows that people will resort to the most extreme action. It's a thesis on why someone would want to destroy the world. Nothing substantial about the world has changed since the start of this video. The same people are still in power, and the world is still on the same path. So you should ask yourself, what can you do to change the world? As an individual, more than likely the impact you have will be very little in the grand scheme of things. Even as substantial as Gabby breaking out the chain of revenge was for her, it didn't end the war. This would only be possible if everyone had the same realizations that she did, and this is what Eren lost hope for. The best way forward is through that collective action. For enough people to make enough little changes to change our entire society for the better. But is it still realistic for all of those changes to be made peacefully by the time we need them to happen? Or is our world already so close to destruction that we must find a more quick and drastic solution? I don't know. But at some point, things will have to get better. Whether it's through the chambers of our governments or through the flames of revolution. That's just the way the world is.